Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Hrund, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you. I love your podcast.
Thank you. Hrund, as a global thought leader, author, and filmmaker, you focus on the power of InnSæi, which is the ancient Icelandic word for intuition, which translates into three meanings from what I've been reading. Can you please explain those three meanings and why InnSæi is so important in our lives today?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm fascinated with everything that has to do with our brain and neuroscience and soul and how we think and co-create and innovate and all that. And so just to correct one thing about InnSæi, because I know that there is text out there saying it is an ancient concept. The word InnSæi was only created in the 19th century from English language, but the Icelandic language is a beautiful language, and the word itself is really a universe in its own, which I'd love to explain to you now. So InnSæi is the Icelandic word for intuition. And I got really closely connected with intuition, and I delved deeply into the word first through my personal experience, but then through my professional experience, which we can talk about later. And to make a long story short, what happened was that I dived into the word InnSæi, and then I started to have conversations with people around the world about intuition, so in English. So I would speak to scientists and spiritual leaders and artists and business leaders about intuition, what it is, what it's not. And I discovered that we have very many different ways of defining intuition. So in a way, it's on an extreme continuum from saying intuition is an irrational impulse that you shouldn't rely on, all the way over to intuition is a woo-woo concept or a new age thing or something that is impossible to describe with science. And then somewhere in between, I would discover that there are more comprehensive ways of describing intuition. And I learned that intuition is actually fundamental to our intelligence. And it's the key to our human genius. So when we have examples of our intelligence reaching its highest performance, this is when we have learned to harness intuition to the benefit of our explorations or analysis or relationships and so on and so forth. So having kind of traveled the world, to have all these conversations through an education program I created, through the film that I created about InnSæi and intuition, then it really brought me home to the Icelandic language and the Icelandic word InnSæi. And I remember late into the process of creating our film, I came up with the idea of the film, and I also came up with the idea to call it InnSæi, even if it was in English. But it was only late into the process still that I really understood why it's so important. And the importance is that InnSæi is the word that holds space for both the spiritual and the scientific, the solid and the poetic, which I think is an honest take on what we are as humans and human spirits. So InnSæi can be defined in three ways. First of all, InnSæi means the sea within. It's combined of two words that are in, which means inside or into. And the second part is sæi, which means to see or the sea. It's beautiful, right?
Yes.
And so the first meaning is the sea within. Now this evokes, the ever-flowing unconscious mind that we have, the sea within that's always flowing and coming up with insights and inklings of thoughts or or some fundamental directions that we take in life. And the sea within cannot be put into boxes because then it ceases to flow. And I actually love that metaphor because we put a lot of life into boxes and silos, right? So it's a good reminder that allowing our minds to flow enables us to harness our intelligence the best way possible in our well being. And then, secondly, InnSæi means to see within. And that has to do with self awareness and introspection, which I think is one of the most important keys that we have to our own lives, to our own journeys in life, but also as entrepreneurs and leaders. And, we really need to know what we are all about and how we need to understand our reactions in different circumstances. And when it comes to intuition, it's so important to be self-aware and to be able to introspect, because we need to be able to make a distinction between what is a bias, a fear, a prejudice, from what is a good intuition. We can't learn to know our intuition unless we know ourselves well enough. And then thirdly, InnSæi means to see from the inside out. And that is about having a strong inner compass that enables us to navigate our own original way in the ocean of life.
So beautiful. I know you touched upon earlier that you've had several experiences that have shaped your quest to dive deeper into the intuition in all its facets. Can you share with us that pivotal moment in your life that led you to recognize the importance of connecting to your own inner world?
Yes, happy to. So I am one of those people who I was relatively young when I knew that I wanted to work for the United Nations or the Red Cross. I wanted to make the world a better place. I did my best at school in order to reach where I wanted to go, and I was lucky in so many ways. I had many amazing opportunities given my age. I was very young when I was, for example, leading a UN agency that was for the first time participating in a post-conflict reconstruction in Kosovo. And it was an incredible time in my life. It was very challenging, but also one of my favorite years, I have to say. But in this particular case, I was 27 when I moved to Kosovo. And I took on a lot of responsibility. And I was so determined, like coming to Kosovo just after the war was like walking into an open wound. And I was determined to give it all I had and serve the people that needed us there. And I completely forgot about my own well-being, my own energy, and the hours in the day were not for me, they were for others, and all that, which also describes, in a way, immaturity. But having said that, also that's something that most of us deal with, or many of us deal with in the world today. The tasks that we are faced with are just so big. So I was very drained after my time in Kosovo. And just after that, I was offered a permanent position with the United Nations after having taken a 2 days competitive examination that we can take as representatives of countries that are underrepresented at the UN. And my job offer was to become a statistician at the UN Economic Commission in Geneva. And then I was to serve the UN around the world after that in different capacities and expertise. When I came to Geneva, the heavy bureaucracy and hierarchy felt all-consuming, and my sense of purpose and hope that I could make a tiny little difference in the work that I was doing kind of it didn't disappear, but it really waned. So that also drained me. And then I went through a very difficult period in my personal life. And this really forced me to look within and decide for myself what I wanted to do. I ended up having my body collapsing. I had 3 slipped discs, and I'm lucky to have been able to work again. And that's another whole story about how we are our own healers. But anyway, so I was confronted with this difficult decision. Do I want to continue in my permanent position, my dream job with the United Nations? And I was in a difficult situation, but I was able to gain that clarity of mind, which is so important. And today I can say in hindsight, I really was aligned with my intuition, my inner voice, myself. I decided to resign and went completely into the unknown. I had no guaranteed job. Nobody said to me, this is a great decision, Hrund. People were like, what are you thinking? And stuff like that. So this really led me as a way for myself to find myself again, to find connection within in order to connect around me, in order to connect again with my inner purpose and like, what am I doing here and how do I want to live this life? It led me to intuition and in Icelandic InnSæi. So my healing process was that. And I did a lot of creative work around that time. I was writing a play, poetry, stories and stuff like that. And which I think is an important practice for people, even if they don't want to do it, make it their profession. So this is where it all started. And from this period, this hard, really dark time in my life, this is when I started to produce the work that I've been building on ever since. When I resigned from the UN, I remember on my last day, I was cleaning my desk. I went down to the Press Coffee Space restaurant on the ground floor in Geneva. And I promised myself that I would stay true to the ideals of the UN, but I really felt like we were serving a system instead of people and the planet. And I felt something was deeply wrong with our systems. There was something missing. I didn't know the words then. I could just feel it. And I promised myself that I would have the courage to follow through with the ideas that would come to me, that I really felt were important, that I would lose sleep over, that would pull us in, or me, in the right direction in terms of contributing in a meaningful way to the world that we live in and through my job.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. And today, when you think about the evolution and what you have just described in your early days, how do you personally stay connected to your intuition while managing such a multifaceted and demanding career?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that on the one hand, I did a lot of self practice and work myself. I did a lot of reading and speaking and research around what I needed to do to get better and find my way. So I practiced, and I would read a lot about nutrition, sleep. I had to learn to sleep again, exercise. How can I exercise in a way that's constructive for my body, the way that my body is now, and stuff like that. So I had to do a lot of self learning with the help of experts, of course. So in a way that period programmed in me ways to stay aligned with intuition and InnSæi. And then on the other hand, I'm human and deeply imperfect, and I forget about myself. I forget about these things, and I run ahead of myself all the time. So I need to pull myself back. So what I do today, mindfully, I do a lot of mindful breathing, even when I'm in a meeting or in the food market. It doesn't always have to be a sit down serious meditation, although I do that too. I am very conscious of how nature is healing. So I spend a lot of time in nature. I come from Iceland. Iceland is like this. The natural forces there are just in your face always. You can hear them, smell them, feel them in your body. But also here where I'm staying now in Germany, the nature here is absolutely beautiful. It's very green and it's very flourishing. I write and I journal. I do that very rigorously. I need that to clear my head and understand what I'm thinking and doing. So I'm a writer. I also have conversations with people, when I to challenge my thinking, because I do think that it's important because we're talking about intuition. We are talking about well harnessed intuition. And the reason why I say this is because it's not enough just to follow your gut. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but our gut can be a very good indicator of what we should be exploring and thinking about. But we need to understand what is a our solid gut feeling versus something that I mentioned earlier, like a bias or a fear or prejudice, or we need to be critical thinkers in order to have a well harnessed intuition.
As you said, I mean, change really begins with us and our and the importance of self-awareness. And for our listeners, how could they begin to cultivate intuition in their daily lives to combat increasing stress, burnout, and other specific personal or professional challenges that they may be facing?
Yeah, so maybe just to mention two things. So my book is full of tips and exercises and food for thought and practices. But two things that I would mention now is that intuition is informed through all our body, not just the brain and not just a small part of the brain. So our senses are working 24/7 to process information, data points, stimuli that we go through every minute of every day. And they send this to our brain. Some of it reaches our conscious mind, but most of it is unconscious. So being mindful and aware, like through your whole body, not just our conventional cognitive thinking. That's one thing that I really recommend people think about. What does that mean? So when you get this gut feeling, when you get chills down your spine, when you get goosebumps, what is this information that you are telling yourself? And we have all these symbols and we have all these reactions. We notice things in our environment. Why do we notice these things but not something else? So that is a great reflection on us. And another thing that I would recommend, which helps build on this, is attention journaling. And this I also write about in my book. So journaling is always good, and I think Julia Cameron is the queen of journaling. And anybody who doesn't know her work should absolutely read her book, The Artist's Way. I learned a lot from it. What I mean by attention journaling is really to journal from the perspective of what you pay attention to. Now, we pay attention to many things throughout the day, but we don't really notice what we notice so much. So, I'm sitting here speaking to you. There's a light here, there's a light here, there's a motorcycle driving down the road. There's so much going on. And I need to be focused on what I'm engaging with at this moment. But there are so many things that we notice throughout the day that when we put our spotlight on these things more and more, what's on the periphery of our sensing and focusing, this is when we start to tap more into intuition and what it is that we are holistically sensing around us. It is also actually, the attention journaling is also a magnificent way to amplify your creative spirit, your creative powers. So what you do is that you pay attention to what you pay attention to and you document it. It sounds simple, but it's the most magical tool that I've ever been given myself. So I really recommend that and just to put another layer of understanding on that, for people who are more like scientifically or practically minded, when you learn a new skill, you practice it and you do it for, sometimes you talk about 6,000 hours, 10,000 hours. Let's say playing the piano, you learn the technicalities of it, where you put your fingers as you play the piano. It's only once the skill, the knowledge has sunken into your sea within, your unconsciousness, that you stop thinking about what you're doing and you're able to apply yourself to it, like really give it all you got. And you know the difference between listening to a pianist that is really all in and putting spirit into the play versus somebody playing the piano that's very technical and all correct. So this is what we're doing when we're tapping into our insight and intuition through our attention, which is really the key to us accessing our self-awareness, creativity, intuition.
So interesting. And in the writing of your recent book and also your movie, you've met world-renowned thinkers, scientists, and spiritual leaders. What were some of the unexpected insights or moments that have profoundly changed your perspective during either the filming or the writing of your recent book?
So the things that come to mind are things like the process of making the film. You know, when I came up with this idea in 2010, it wasn't like for the first it took 6 years to actually, you know, until we premiered it. This is often with films, it takes time. But in 2010, it was more of a intuition, meditation, mindfulness was something that was not, people were not as open about as they are today. So that's a big thing I want to share with people, because I think that's important. So some people in our films, and I won't name anyone in this particular context, but they would come out and say, yes, I actually meditate, even if my title indicates that I don't do such things. Do you know what I mean? So that's something I feel like really wanting to share, because there's some beautiful progress that's been made in the last 15 years or so when it comes to our acceptability of this part of our intelligence and being. I was also really inspired by all the threads and dots that we were able to make between the very spiritual and the very scientific. And also, in, like, I would say a bridge between these is also the arts, like Marina Abramovic, you know, the way that she speaks about art, and not everything goes into the film, you know, but she's worked with shamans and indigenous leaders, and she's really done some amazing work with her breathing and connecting with the natural world. That was something that gave us a lot of confidence to speak, to make these connections more broadly. Another thing that I never tire of mentioning, and that is my dear friend, the ocean explorer, Enric Sala, who is in the film as well. So we go from the arts into the ocean, and he's a marine biologist. He followed his dream to work in anything related to the ocean. He wanted to be an explorer like Jacques Cousteau. He went on to work as a professor in a university, and after 7 years as a professor there, he just felt like he was writing the obituary of the world's ocean. It was deteriorating, and he didn't feel like he was providing a cure for it. So he resigned from his job. He decided to spend most of his time in the ocean in order to help save it. And when he reflects on that experience, he speaks about intuition. And he loves the word InnSæi, the sea within, because he says, when I'm diving in the ocean, the sea within and the sea around me become one. I'm just one with what I'm doing. And that is what we call a state of flow. That is when we're really in our zone, able to harness our intelligence in the best way possible. And I would say that also with his story, he's had an impact with his work through the pristine seas that he founded along with others after leaving the university position. And they've been able to protect 27 of the largest marine protected areas in the world. And he speaks a lot about how being in the ocean, immersing himself, his whole body, we talked about intuition, being informed by the whole body, being able to immerse himself in the ocean in order to inform his understanding of what's wrong with the ocean and how to bring it back. I think that's another very profound finding that we had through the film. And maybe just to link it a little bit to whether we speak about the anxious generation, you know, the social media impact on Generation Z and younger generations, but also us as adults. You know, what we immerse ourselves in and how we immerse ourselves in the world, how we pay attention to it, informs our intuition. And this becomes who we are and what we think and how we show up in the world and how we choose to navigate it. I think that's another profound reminder that also came to me very, very strongly through my interviews in the book as well.
How do you balance fear? Because often if you have a sense of a deep intuition to either do or not do something or say or not, how do we actually know? Are there specific insights that you could share with our audience whereby they can truly understand that this is really deep, profound intuition versus the fear side of our human nature that may be guiding us in a specific direction?
This is a complicated but great question. And I think that the most important thing to say before I say anything else is that we need to know ourselves well enough to be able to learn to distinguish these things, and also to remember that we change a lot through every month or year or whatever. So we keep changing. We need to be in sync, aligned with ourselves in order to understand what is fear that I should listen to, and where should I bring in my courage to conquer that fear. What comes to me now as we talk about this is what I think is very important is, in order to listen to your well harnessed true intuition, you need to trust your own experiences of things. So let's allow that to sink in a little bit. So we all have relationships in our private life, professional lives, as we go through the day. Let's all think about this now. Do we remember a time when we feel something strongly, and we can even feel it in our gut, but we decide to dismiss it because it's going to interrupt a good flow, or somebody's going to be mad at us, or it's going to change the track that we think we're on. Stuff like that. These can be very small things, but gradually they pile up on each other. And what starts to happen is that we start to distrust our own experiences of things. And this means that we start to distrust our own senses. And when that happens, our confidence, self-confidence, gets undermined. And this does blur our access to our good intuition. So I think that's a very important thing to understand. And then on the other hand, like I've just been going through some really big changes in my life, sold my house that I've owned for 20 years, moved countries, changed my career, all these different fears. And in order to have courage, which is one of the things I want to have in life, I don't have it all the time or in every area, to be clear, but I do want to be courageous about my life choices. This is something that I need to know about myself, and I need to be sure because I think love is the key to courage. So let's open up the word love. It's not just romantic love, but it's loving yourself enough to be giving yourself the time to listen to how you're feeling and what you should be honoring and what you can put aside. And just the force of love and curiosity and love for the world, love for your life, love for your people, just wanting to do stuff and be curious and wanting to live a juicy, fulfilled life. I think that gives us courage as well. I think it's harder to be courageous against something that we fear if we're hopeless, we feel alone, we're in the dark somehow. I think that kind of goes together as well.
And I want to talk now about joy, which, as you know, is a main topic of our podcast. And I just want to also mention that even the whole creation of 1 million years of joy was actually a true desire to follow my intuition, because I kept suppressing these ideas that were coming, and it's really a labor of love that I've decided to embark on, and it's a journey that has been fascinating in many, many ways. And it took courage because I've never done a podcast. It's been a complete adventure. So thank you for sharing that. If we go now to the topic of joy, how do you see the relationship between following one's intuition and experiencing joy?
Okay, I love that question. Before I answer it, I want to say, because you mentioned something that can help us more fully digest what we're talking about now. You said you had this idea that wouldn't leave you alone. You couldn't stop thinking about it. And that's an indication that we need to listen to our inner voice more. And when we do attention journaling, this is what emerges very often. The ideas that won't leave us alone, they really want to come through us. And if we don't do them, somebody else will. And then also the voices in our heads that we have that we can just say goodbye to because they don't serve us anymore. So just to put that into a little bit of context. So your question, how does intuition, InnSæi, relate to joy, finding joy? So, wow, how do I even begin to answer that? Because it's like, to me, it's in so many ways so fundamental. So let's say also we're going through a difficult time in our life and there isn't much joy. We can still be following our InnSæi and intuition. Let's just put that out there. When we pay attention to what we pay attention to, we become more alive. We are not going through life as zombies. We're not going through life on auto because it's possible to do it. I've done it and I was doing quite well, you know. I was just kind of withering away as a human being, you know. So being aligned to insight and intuition is about paying attention to the things around you, being open to allowing the world to come to you, not being super deliberate and planned about every step you take and what you allow to come into your life. Speak to strangers, you know, see the beauty and the colors around you, smell the air, you know, just notice things that you don't notice so much when you're on autopilot. And what happens when you do that, you are syncing with your soul, yourself, your intuition. You all of a sudden you have more ideas about things to do and things to celebrate, and you have more energy, and it's like photosynthesizing, you know, it's this coming to life, and it's a beautiful thing. So our lights get turned on in a way when we are aligned with our intuition, given that we are going through a relatively happy or mundane phase. It's not a really hard time. But also, having said that, when we go through a really hard time, you know, I went through a very sad time recently, losing my mother. And we've all lost a loved one, and every experience is unique. But we also know that in the deepest hardship, in the greatest sorrow that we experience, we also experience the deepest forms of love.
Mm.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yes.
So, to me, being aligned with insight and intuition is about welcoming all the colors that come with life into our life, and understanding that life is complex and things can coexist at the same time, black and white, you know, and then all the colors in between, of course. Difficult times and good times, joy and laughter, and deep sadness or sorrow. It's okay. And I think that's joy to me is about being alive, you know. And you've I think you've already did at least one episode about this. You know, when we feel a sense of awe, our brains rewire. And now that we know that intuition is informed by our whole body, we also know that our brain is also informed by our whole body. So when you have your toes in the grass, when you hold somebody's hand, or you feel the breeze on your skin, and you look up in the starry sky and you just think, oh my goodness, this is so beautiful. This is the moment when we are really connected with who we are and the world around us.
So beautiful. And so many ideas come to mind. The one that comes really intensely is the sense of surrender, and surrendering to also to the gifts of life and to the colors of life, as you were saying, and surrendering sometimes also our life in the hands of others, because that's what happened to me when I had to undergo a 9-hour brain operation, and I had to literally just surrender my all my trust in the neurosurgeon and all the team that were operating on me, and believe and have this deep belief and intuition that I will come out of this process alive. And it goes back to courage that you were mentioning as well. But I was wondering if you could maybe share any connections that you have experienced that relate to this concept of surrender.
Yeah.
Because, you know, one side of our brain is very active in being very rational and calculated and so on, and that may suppress our ability to, as I said, surrender to other gifts and insights that may emerge.
Yeah, so and thank you for sharing that example. I mean, I can just imagine how much trust you needed to harness in that moment, and just, you know, we've got this. And I think that we have willpower, which is amazing. You know, we have cortisol, we have testosterone, we have all these things to make us wake up in the morning and do stuff, which is beautiful. We also have amazing organization skills, and our ability to analyze and plan and calculate are amazing. But when it comes to intuition and harnessing our greatest human potential, it is always a give and take. So you can't just make the water run one way, you have to fill the tank as well, right? That is a simple metaphor for how we function. Also our intelligence, but we as human beings. And so when we as people, and this is an important chapter in my life, thinking I can plan my life, I can do everything I need to do. I usually know the answers best. I'm like embarrassed to say it, but I went through a period like that as well, as a director of an organization, thinking that I know who I need to meet, I know who I need to do all the time. It's good to be deliberate. It's good to have these skills, but we need to match them and balance them with receptivity and being vulnerable to what may come from those moments. There are so many people that I've met after publishing my book. And just recently, this amazing CEO in the UK who shared with me that when he lets go of control, he loves the serendipity that happens. The magic of life. He meets somebody or something awesome happens, or he has an idea or whatever, but he doesn't like how unorganized it is. And I was like, yep, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to like it more because that's the magic,
Yes.
right? As well. So it's trusting more. And again, it also comes back to knowing ourselves so that we feel comfortable in trusting. We need to give ourselves permission to trust. We can't force ourselves to do that because that's not always the best idea either.
I want to talk now about the specific challenges that we're seeing in our world that may cause a lot of stress for certain individuals. How do you see the role of InnSæi evolving and in helping people and societies navigate these times and hopefully bringing more joy and harmony into our lives?
I would say, and I want to make a bold generalization, I would say a lot of people are disconnected, maybe not entirely, or not entirely, but disconnected from their souls and dreams and aspirations and hopes and joy as they go through everyday life. Many reasons for this, but there is a disconnection. When we are disconnected, I've gone through it more than once in my life. When we are disconnected, we also become more disconnected from other people and the world around us. When we are disconnected from other people and the world around us and the natural world or the man-made world, the world becomes more fragmented, siloed, it's more mechanical, it's less alive, and we are less a part of it. When we innately embody, when we really understand what it means to be connected and navigating with InnSæi, intuition as our inner compass, we innately get how everything is interconnected, how you and I are. And it's neuroscientifically not clear where I end and you begin. So as we are speaking here today, Andrea, which is such a great pleasure, we are co-regulating our brains and our cells are co-regulating, our neural cells. And we are co-learning and we are co-creating. And when I don't have access to another human being or an animal to co-create like that, I could literally die of loneliness. So this is how interconnected we are. One of my mentors who has now passed, his name is Malidoma Somei, and he was a shaman and a spiritual leader from the Dagara community in Burkina Faso. He said to me once, he said, it's so interesting with people in the Western world, the industrialized Western world. I know these terms are never quite fitting. You think that you can go through education and get a university degrees, and then you're set for life. He said, in my community, the Dagara community, which is known for being spiritually wise, we thrive on the idea that every day is an unknown, day. Like we have no idea how it's going to unfold. And that is what makes life and the day worth living. And I think that's just I think that's a very important thing to bear in mind.
And so, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice about intuition and joy, what would it be?
To my younger self, I would say, don't confuse seriousness and lack of joy with intelligence. I think we sometimes think that that goes together, or at least that is what I feel like I would have wanted to know much earlier. And I would also tell myself to seek out joy and laugh more, and to trust that it's going to be very good for me, for my well-being, but also very productive if I want to think about the choices I make in my life. And productive, by that I mean that's good for me. It's going to be to the benefit of my life, my closest ones, my loved ones, the career I want to take. I will see more, hear more, feel more, and I will give more. And I think generosity is another hugely important factor when it comes to living a fulfilled life. And just to say, because I kind of lost my thread a little bit with the story about the shaman, because what he also added was that so every day is an unknown, but when we go outside into the natural world, nature is chaotic, it's complex. It's not complicated, it's complex. And that rhymes with our spirit. So, just to make the clarification of complex and complicated, if I may, if we have the time.
Yes.
So, something that's complex is something like a human being. It's like the rainforest. You can't take it apart and put it into individual pieces and then put it back together again and think it's going to work like before. But for complicated things like machines or cars, you can take them apart into their individual pieces and put them together again to make them work as they did before. This is another thing that I think is hugely important given the world we live in today and the challenges that we are faced with as human beings, as leaders, whatever our roles are, is to try to connect with the complexity that is involved in our challenges, whether it's climate change, biodiversity, changing work market, technology, whatever it is, it's going to be mostly complex. And when we are in tune and aligned with InnSæi, that's what we intuitively understand. It isn't as complex as it used to be, but we will change the logic in how we approach it. We will understand that we can't chop it down into silos and boxes and tackle it only from there. That we need to find the balance.
One fun question for you. If you could design an experience for the entire world to participate in that helps people explore joy and intuition, what would it look like?
Wow, that's a wonderful question. I probably would want to be able to create some sort of constellation, an environment in which people can feel safe, experience an atmosphere and an environment that will enable them to let down their guard, to trust, really sink in with their whole body and experience something absolutely beautiful and wonderful. And it doesn't have to be grandiose, it can even just be small gestures of kindness or something that they find beautiful, and to really support them, assist them in experiencing that experience mindfully so that they really imprinted in their body what that feels like.
Yes, and it's those experiences that truly change us in terms of our beliefs, in terms of even our mindsets. So really love that. Any final thoughts, Hrund, that you'd like to share with our audience?
I would love to ask you a question, if I may. So your passion is among others is joy. You want to bring joy to people. You want people to talk about joy and bring joy more to life, if I can put it that way. When you came across my work on InnSæi and you read the threefold meaning, how did you relate to it from the lens of joy?
It inspired me in a profound way because my life, particularly after the first brain operation that I had in November 2020, my life has been driven by intuition. And it's almost like there's two Andreas. My life is almost segmented between Andrea before the operation, which was very much driven by, analysis and things that ultimately are not even important, I would say. And when I experienced such a radical shift in my realization of how life can end in an instant. You also alluded to this earlier, that despite the chaos and the fears associated with having a brain tumor, luckily it was not cancerous. There was a lot of questions, what did I do and why did this happen and so on. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was a gift to actually see life in a completely new way. And despite the adversity and the preparation before the actual 9-hour operation, I was able to find immense joy. And this is why I even did a TEDx on it, because as you said, we can actually find joy even in the most challenging moments of our lives. And I basically woke up from the operation, and although I couldn't walk, and of course, the recovery was very, very lengthy, it was just such a gift to be alive that it truly transformed how I look at every single moment that I spend. It has to be with intention, and it has to be fueled by intuition. And even the guests that I bring on the podcast, there's something very intuitive to the process, because I read so many books, and sometimes there's this positive energy that just emerges, like, wow, I would absolutely love to bring this guest on, like it was for you. It was very, very strong. It has driven a lot of the work that I do today, and consequently I'm listening more to my intuition, to my heart, and it's been an incredible journey. And actually, this has even opened the door for me to do research on joy. We currently are doing a research in over 38 countries on joy across generations, across cultures. And my intention is also to do a documentary series on joy, to hopefully bring the concepts that I've been uncovering, both at the brain level, the scientific level, the cultural aspects that relate to joy, and also bring an educational aspect that hopefully inspires people to live more joyfully, despite the chaos around us, despite challenges that may arise personally or professionally. So that's really where I am.
That's amazing. It's like, and you're also in a way, I mean, you're describing many things, and one of the things that I'm sensing from you is also this yearning for life, and just really embracing life, and then giving it onwards. I think that's, and also your story of going through this really, tough experience, hard experience, that the challenging part, it sounds like you embraced it and allowed it to become your strength, your superpower.
Yes, exactly. It's my superpower. And I have to say that, last summer when I was getting ready to celebrate 3 years since my operation, and I do regular MRIs to make sure everything's fine. I see my neurosurgeon. And this is when I had the second shock, where they said, oh, everything's fine with a tumor that basically was here in the back, but we found a brain aneurysm behind your eyes.
Oh,
And that I could not believe, because as I said, you think, wow, I've gone through this massive, massive operation and everything's fine. And now I get this other news. And surprisingly, both the tumor and the aneurysm had been growing for over 10 years. When we started looking back at scans that had been done many, many years ago, they had been missed by multiple doctors. As I said, it's what is life telling me here? And yes, I did have an operation for the brain aneurysm last October. All's good. So once again, it's almost as if every situation is just amplifying my thirst and my joy
yeah.
for life. And I'm realizing that, yeah, every moment, whether I'm with my husband, the kids, those that I love, maybe the last. And it's just these last few years have just been so intense in terms of positive emotions. That is why a lot of the work that I do today is focused mainly on joy.
Amazing. Well, that is such an incredible story. Wow, and it's really hard. Like, you get these, I don't know if we should call them backlashes, but like that's like it's really hard, and just maybe reminds us that there are many things that we can be intentional about, like how we navigate, but we can't be intentional about what we are confronted with, right? I mean, and that's, we can't control everything, you know, so it's like life can be very, very hard, but it's the old saying, it's how we go through it is what really matters. But I think there are fewer things more powerful than when people speak from a place like that, and they just really turn their hard experience into strength, and then it becomes really strong and full of spirit, you know. It's amazing, and I'm glad it all turned out, you know, well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It means a lot. So, any final thoughts that you may wish to share with our audience? I know you've just recently launched your book a couple of months ago. I encourage everyone to buy it, to also watch your movie if they have not seen it. Anything else that you may wish to share with our audience?
My book is coming out in all continents, translated in 12 languages this year and next year. My TED Talk is coming out in November. But maybe just to leave with the listener, I encourage you, dear listener, to take a moment after this conversation or whenever you get the chance to think about what your InnSæi feels like, where you feel it in your body, and ask yourself, when was the last time I listened to my intuition, and what happened next? And when was the last time I didn't, and how that unfolded for me?
Well, on those beautiful words, thank you so much, Hrund. It's been an immense pleasure to spend this beautiful moment with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. It's been a real pleasure.